Shalom and welcome, Shana Tova. Happy Jewish New Year for everybody. My name is Yehuda Michael. I am a program director at MCTC. Mishav, Israel Agency for International Development Agency at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is welcoming you to Spotlight on Women Leaders of the World series. On this series, we invite women leaders from all over the world and they share their experience with us. If you have any question to our guest today, please feel free to write it into the comment section and we'll get back into it at the end of the interview. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We are honored today to host the advocate Meenakshi Arora Werner, a senior counsel at the Supreme Court of India. Advocate Arora is a senior counsel with a practice of over 30 years before the Supreme Court of India. She has made a significant contribution in the field of women and children rights. Her effort in the Vishakha Case in 1997, wherein the Supreme Court laid down guidelines protecting women against sexual harassment at workplace, has culminated into the enactment of legislation in 2013. Her input in the Sakshi Case 2004 resulted in framing a guideline for examining of children victims of sexual abuse and have now become a law. She also has, to her credit, a large number of path-breaking judgments on diverse aspects of constitutional and human rights, including the right to privacy, election reform in India. Welcome and shalom, Advocate Arora and Werner.
Shalom, and thank you very much for hosting me on your show. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for joining us, for taking time in your very busy schedule. I also want to mention that our Advocate Arora was in the Mishav's Women Conference in 2018. Thank you for joining that, also joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Great. Let us start with the question. My first question for you will be, can you tell us about your current position at the Supreme Court of India?
I'm a designated senior counsel, which is something similar to the Queen's Counsel in UK. So you get designated by the Supreme Court and where you appear and you argue cases which have certain importance, and that's it. That's my position today at the Supreme Court as a senior counsel. Yeah. To explain it a little bit more, it's like the Queen's Counsel, what you have in the UK. People would know that.
Wow, that's really great.
Mm-hmm.
Is being a lawyer was your dream for a long time? How did you get into this field at all?
You know, in my time, when I became a lawyer, most people, if they were not successful at anything else, they came to this profession. But for me, that was not so. That was a profession of my first choice. And a lot has changed there, so between then and now. And I don't think if I had to change anything, I would be anything else. No, I would still be a lawyer, definitely. There is so much to it to do, you know, to change so many things. It gives you the ability, the position to do that. It's a great profession.
Wow, that's really great. The other question I want to ask you about is, I mentioned the Vishakha case in 1997. I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. Tell us more about this case and its impacts on forming a guideline and protecting women against sexual harassment at workplace.
Yes. You know, there is a very small history to Vishakha case, as we call. Vishakha came about at a time when we did not have anything that protected women at their place of work. And Vishakha goes back to actually 1991 or so. There was a woman who was working with an NGO to prevent what is called child marriages, which still would take place in India. And she tried to intervene in one, and the retaliation was a gang rape by the men of that particular family. So we were very appalled, and we said, if a woman's just discharging her duty, she's doing her work, surely her employer has certain responsibilities to see that she's protected. Now, that's how Vishakha started. And at that time, there was no CEDAW. guidelines, there were no rules, nothing. So the NGOs were up in arms. They wanted an independent investigation. There was a lot of racial issues, but I just felt at that time that was not enough. What we needed was an acknowledgement of fact that if women have to work and they have to be given an environment which is safe, free from any kind of such, the word harassment was really not in our mind, but free from any such fear, where they can work freely and be equal to men. And we put in that one paragraph in the petition, and fortunately our judge took that paragraph, and this is 1991-92. And it took 5 years. And the court was very wary of entering into an area where they would be legislating because there was no law. So the court had to pronounce guidelines which would take the place of the law till such time as the law is enacted. Judges were definitely a little bit, hesitant to do that. But fortunately for us, in the meantime, the government had ratified the CEDAW. Now, once the CEDAW was ratified, we changed our position and we said that if you ratify an international convention and don't translate it into domestic laws, that's not good enough, because women are entitled to protection at place of work. And using that ratification of CEDAW, we pushed the Supreme Court to lay down those guidelines. Those guidelines were guidelines which protected women from sexual harassment at place of work. Number one, they acknowledged that sexual harassment happens at a place of work, which was virtually a denial position prior to that. Number two, they laid down protection orders. They laid down the guidelines for the employers, the remedial actions. Now, between 1997 and 2013, for 16 years, the guidelines held the field. And women used those guidelines to address, that was their remedy. And in 2013, finally, the legislation came about, and we have that legislation. Now, that is Vishakha and its background for you.
Wow, this is really a very important legislation that passed in the women protection working-place. Sexual harassment is something that a lot of countries and places are facing, and I think, wow, this is amazing to hear from you about the story of how this happened. Now I'm also going to take you the same case, another one. I want to ask you about the Sakshi case. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it again. Tell us about its importance and what it was about.
Sakshi was a case of a child sexual abuse. So when the Sakshi case happened sometime in the year 2000, we had a law on a rape, which was traditionally understood sexual intercourse. But this was a case of a digital abuse of a very young child by her father. And the law had no provision for it. And the police wanted to make very light of it and put it into outraging the modesty of a woman, which would be 2 years sentence at best for the father for having abused his own child. And to get away with it, we were completely outraged by that. And we approached the court and we said that, number one, you have to pronounce that rape would include all forms of sexual abuse of women, and it can't be just limited to traditionally understood intercourse between a man and a woman. And naturally, in case of a child, that would not happen. Now, the matter carried on to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court felt that no, that was an area of a legislative arena, and only a legislation can amend that. But we had yet one part of that particular case where how would you examine a child witness in matters of sexual abuse? So until then, we didn't have any form of a protection of a child witness who would step into a witness box. Now, a child witness in a sexual abuse is not like an ordinary witness. They need protection. So the court then, apart from the fact that they didn't agree with us at that time, and the law underwent an amendment only in 2013 to make the sexual offenses all-encompassing, coming from Sakshi recommendation, the court recommended that the government must amend the law. But they laid down guidelines as to how would you treat child victims of sexual abuse. You can't have their examination in the court like you would do for an ordinary witness. They were entitled to protection. The idea is to elicit the truth. Now, to elicit the truth, you don't have to re-traumatize a child again. So they said that you can examine the children in the places where they're most comfortable, maybe in their schools, maybe in their home, maybe in a playground. And even in a cross-examination, they must be protected. The accused must not be brought in front of them. So all those guidelines for examination of child victim came to be laid down in Sakshi, and then which became the law. And of course, the provision of rape came to be amended, and the judgment recommended the government should amend the law, and the law stood amended finally in 2013.
Wow, children are very vulnerable in such situations. They don't really speak out, and children are usually keeping it until they grow up. We heard so many cases that developed after many years in many parts of the world, and I think it's very important that you set up this, help to set up this law. I think it's very helpful for many generations to come. That is really fantastic. Now I want to ask you a question about yourself. You were the fifth woman to be assigned as a senior counsel at the Supreme Court of India. What was that like?
Felt very good. It's a matter of recognition. But having said that, I would say there is a need to have more women there, and don't have them there just because they're of their gender, or to say that you're doing service to a particular gender because you don't have enough women and you want to do the right thing. There are many women out there who are very competent, and they just need those opportunities to showcase their abilities. We have to start recognizing that and start bringing in more women, and not because they are women, but they are as good as any other man there. So I have a small problem with that, but I indeed was very happy to be designated as a senior counsel.
I want to build up actually by your answer to ask you the next question.
Okay.
We just last week in the U.S. Justice Ruth Ginsburg has passed away, which is a sad story. And I heard her story on the news. It says she was the only student at Harvard when she graduated, one of the fifth or students, and when she get appointed to the position that she were, she was the second person to be justice in the United States. And this is not only in America, but in many countries in the world also. A lot of positions are filled by guys, not actually by women. Do you see changes now involving women in traditional man-associated tasks? How is that in India?
You know, there are changes. Women are, their numbers are very small where they are represented, but they are representing everywhere. Whether it's the space, or they are the CEOs of the companies, or they are judges like Ruth Ginsburg, or whichever be the field in technology, science, everywhere. Unfortunately, their representation at the top is very, very small. And still a very large segment of women, and you know, we are 50, and this is a thing that I very strongly feel about. We are half the population of this world. If we are half the population of this world, then why, over the ages, we are only looked upon as homemakers first, and as professionals or career women later on? And why is our representation still so small at places where it matters? Now, I see the wonderful change in Africa, and I'm completely impressed by that. Africa is largely torn by a lot of strife and war. But of late, if you have noticed, they have many more women legislators, much more than in any part of the world. And those women are now making a difference to how Africa looks inwards in its legislations, in its protection. I think that's a very serious indicator for women now. Our homes and hearths will be taken care of, and there is an equal sharing of responsibility of the home and hearth with our men. But women have to now make their presence felt equally, and not merely just as being traditionally homemakers, but have to now step out in more numbers. Our numbers are small, and we need to have a much wider presence in every area that matters to our lives, to what we would want the world to be for us.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Women must be included in any decision-making process, including those that matters for women. Sometimes you see the entire committee or something as guys to decide about something related with women, and it's very sad to see that in many parts of the world. I hope that will change in the near future.
I hope so.
Another question again about you. You've been like 13 years working in the field, and you've been in a lot of you handled a lot of cases. What have been your biggest challenges, and how did you overcome those challenges when they come?
Some of the very biggest challenges very early on in my career, I think, was my gender. It's very hard for a woman, particularly in a highly male-dominated profession, to make your mark as a good lawyer or to be accepted. It was to work twice as hard as any men there, and to prove your mettle. And then the second stage of it is that you, even when you are working hard to prove that you are as good as the next man there, very often there's a patronizing attitude towards women. So you don't recognize them for their merit, but you just kind of do it because you want to have presence of women there. It looks good for you to show that there are women there. Now, that is again, that's again demeaning, if I may say. No, that's not right. Women are there because they want to be there, because they're good at what they do. And one has to start to recognize that. So those were the very early challenges. Some of them exist even today. You may have broken some glass ceilings, but with every glass ceiling that you break, and whether you become a senior counsel or you become an advocate on record, or even if my colleagues, some of them have gone in and become judges and are extremely bright judges, there is another yet glass ceiling thereafter. The glass ceiling is to be accepted as one and put my gender aside and just look at me as what I am doing there. I know there's a dichotomy when I say that there's not enough representation of women. When I talk about a representation of women and men as equal, I say there are no genders out there. They are there for their talent, for their work, for what they can perform. And I think that's what Justice Ginsburg has written in many of her things about women having equal positions as well. But the other person that I remember is Justice Claire Dewey from Canada, who was the judge at the Supreme Court. And she insisted that when they addressed her, they only addressed her as Justice Dewey, not as Miss Justice Ms. Dewey. There is no gender out there. There is a judge out there. And that's where I think is what I think should be the future to go for.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot of changes that's coming, but there's still a lot of work ahead of us to bring this equalities and to avoid all gender-based discrimination or race-based discrimination, all sort of discrimination that is happening in the world. And I'm also hoping for the better future. And now I will ask you, what would you tell your young self today, if you get the chance?
I would say,
big question.
When the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Wow.
And I would tell that to myself again. So there are times when you're young, your position with your career development, everything, is not entirely in your hand. There are many others who are controlling that. And those are very tough times. So when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Just carry on. I would just repeat that to myself once again, but I think that would be it.
Wow, that's a strong message. Okay, let me bring my last question actually to you. What advice would you give to the next generation of women leaders in India and the world?
Each one of us will have different challenges to face in our time. When I was coming up in my career, my challenges were different. As the next generations come in, their challenges are different. While we may have broken some glass ceilings and made way for the youngers, but there are many to be broken as yet. And do not stop till you are equal shoulder to shoulder with the men. Do not stop till we reach the point where we are equal and we are not looked at for our gender, but for what we stand for. Because why I say this is that I may be that small percentage of women across the world who made my career, who made my profession, and stood for my own beliefs. But the globe has a very large percentage of women who are looked only as homemakers, and their contribution is not recognized. Across the whole of Asia, Africa, where women not only make homes, but they also are sometimes bringing in the bread to the tables, and yet their contribution is not recognized. Now, that is a challenge that I see, and I think the next generation has to work to make a change there.
Great message. Never give up. That's true. That's amazing. Thank you, Advocate Werner, for being with us today and sharing with our viewers your experience and taking time also in a very busy schedule. I think we do have a few questions from our audience. My colleague Nuria Levy is just joining us online, and she's going to bring those questions to you. Nuria?
Hi, thank you, Yuda, and thank you very much.
Hi.
It's really very
You.
nice. It's very nice to have you with us today, and it's been really interesting to hear all your comments and very interesting answers to the questions posed. So once again, thank you so much for being with us. And I've been following at some of the Facebook comments. We've got people from all over the world watching and giving us their likes and hearts. So I really appreciate everybody from that is listening today. So one of the things that Yehuda brought up was the amazing life and story of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And one of the questions was, she was an inspiration to so many, and she was an incredible role model. And we were wondering if you had some role models also in your life that made you reach your position today.
Yes, there were instances when the gender played against me. Okay, but the point is you don't stop just because. I remember Ruth Ginsburg documentary, and where she says very specifically that nobody took her in a law firm because they specifically said that they don't take women. And it changed the course of her career to go into teaching, and she then landed up in the US Supreme Court. So I keep telling myself this, that sometimes there are things that work against us because of our gender, but we must never give up and keep striving. But that aspect of what changed her career thing made her become such a fierce gender rights person, and she made a change to how many women across the world with her judgments. So I have a very small contribution in Vishakha for women in India, but I think there is much more to be done as yet, and that's not the end.
Thank you so much, which brings me to my next question. Many countries have gone down the path of setting up quotas in order to ensure that the gender gap is reduced. And as we see in the Supreme Court in India, most of the faces are men. I think we can count with one hand how many judges, female judges there are. Do you think that's something that India would consider in future?
You remind me of Justice Ginsburg. And you know what she had said? Somebody asked her that question. And they asked, how many judges would you expect to have on the US Supreme Court? She said 9. She said, the men occupied that court for so many years. Why should not women now take over that particular court? But you know, having said that, it's not very easy. And maybe somewhere a wishful thinking, because men are not going to very easily relinquish that position to us. We will have to wrest it to ourselves. And I agree with you. There was a time when I came to the court, there was not a single woman judge. We had 3 women judges in the past, we have 2 just now. But I am hopeful that this will change. But I want to say this, do not appoint women just because you want to show that we are making a representation for the women there. You know, take them because they have their merit and they have the strength, then they can discharge their function. This business of patronizing us is something which I dislike. You know, it's a dichotomy when you come to the quota and patronizing. The quota becomes important because people who have been traditionally disadvantaged and have not had a representation, you want them to have representation. But when you give that representation, give it with grace and give it with recognition that you want to have women there, and not because you are just trying to show a face that, well, we are putting in women. That's the part that I get angry about.
Understandably so. So what is next for you? Which is your next ambition? And where do you want to see yourself in, say, 10 years from now?
No, I haven't thought so far, but my next ambition, and it's something that bothers me, is what's happening in India. We have a very large segment of women who work in unorganized setup. They have extremely hard lives. They work, they provide for the families, they have abusive husbands, and there is no law that gives them the protection in terms of their work because it's an unorganized sector. Now, that's an area that I really wish to make a difference if I can. And I think that's my project as of now.
It's a big project and it's a very worthwhile project. So we certainly are behind you.
Yes, it's a very large segment of women who go completely unrecognized and they have a huge contribution. But they are breadwinners, they are homemakers, they have abusive families who have no contribution, and they have no law to protect them, which is, but then that's not just India, it's across the world in many countries, that's a position.
This is true, very true, and very unfortunate. Next question would be regarding this specific topic that you just mentioned. Do you see this type of crimes committed on the increase, or is it just perception because of we now see it more in the media?
No, this is not a perception because of the media. And unfortunately, media does not cover that particular segment of women. Unfortunately for us, media covers today only what it wishes to sensationalize, and not what media should also cover to educate and to inform about these rights. So this is one segment that I do not find where the media covers adequately. And there is a very large segment of women, and this segment's not just India, it's actually a large segment across the Asian region, in Africa, across globe, women who are traditional, who work at home, who go out to earn the bread, come back, support children, and men may not have any role to play in that part, and yet they work in the unorganized sector. The problem is, if they were in the organized sector, they would have certain protections, but the domestic workers, people who work in the household, the women who work in the farming and all. So there's a huge amount out there.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And we've seen an increase due to the COVID-19, the increase in domestic violence all over the world. I'm assuming this is something that India is also experiencing.
It's true. It is very, very true, because the financial, women having lost the financial resource, they were not able to work. With abusive husbands at home, children, yes, that is very, very true. The domestic violence went up significantly during this particular period.
Mm-hmm. I just, again, wanted to thank you so much for all your time, and
Thank you.
And to your beautiful country, all the very best of health, and to you. And I'll pass you back to our colleague, Yehuda.
Thank you
Okay.
very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nuria, for following up the questions online and also for asking them. I also want to really thank Advocate Werner for taking time and for joining us today from New Delhi. Very beautiful city. I've been there a couple of years ago. We just talked about it before. Also, a big thank you for all of our audiences that is following this online from all over the world. Please check our social media as well as our website for upcoming programs. We do have online courses that are happening. Please check with your nearest Israeli mission in your country to see what we are offering. Our website is www.mctcmfa.gov.il. You can find all the upcoming programs there. We're also going to have in a month from now another guest in a Spotlight on Women Leaders of the World program. Once again, thank you so much for everyone, and shalom.
Thank you so much, and shalom. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.